It's an honor to be here. I have to say that this is sort of a full circle moment for me because I was involved in VLab 10 years ago in 2007, and it has come such a long way. But you do not understand how much work these people have put in to put on this event. It's like a little miracle whenever these things sort of get converged. And so I know how much work that is, and it is an honor to sort of, we all get to be basking in sort of the space that you guys have created. So thank you for that. We today are going to be talking about two of the biggest buzzwords now in Silicon Valley, AI and big data, or data centers. At Alchemist, one of our mentors, Sean Burns, who's the former CTO of Flurry, he says that there's so much AI that we need a new term, AAI, artificial intelligence, because everything is AI. And so we're going to have a good amount of time to go deep in terms of understanding and teasing out different threads across AI and specifically data centers and the opportunities and threats that those present. But before we do, I want to see who's here. So how many people, first of all, are a founder right now, where you are starting a company or a part of a founding team? Okay, terrific. Yes, applause for founders. You are heroes. Whether things are going well or going poorly, you're heroes. Just enjoy the process wherever you're at. How many people are inside? How many people right now are working at a data center company or working with someone that's involved with data centers? Okay, terrific. How many people are at a corporation, a large corporation, so a company with worth $100 million or more? Okay. And how many people want to be founders but aren't founders right now? Okay. And just so one more question: how many people are technical? Come from more of either an engineering or a Oh, wow. Oh, we have a technical crowd. We can go deep. Okay. And how many people would classify themselves more on the business side? Okay, terrific. Well, let me give you the agenda for today. So today, I really want to jump to the juice, which is all the questions that are in your head. So whatever questions you guys have, please start thinking of those, and you can start presenting those to us via the platform. What's going to happen is that I'm going to give a quick overview, and then I've asked each of the panelists to introduce themselves as well. You guys are really in luck because we have perspectives from across. It's like data centers are like elephants, depending upon the blind man touching the elephant, where depending upon what you're touching, it seems like a different beast. And we have vantage points from early stage startups to later stage startups to corporations to the vulture capitalists, the VCs that are fueling and funding the opportunities. And so you're going to really get the benefit of hearing all of those. And then after everybody has given their vantage points, I'm going to ask a couple questions, but then we're going to really open it up and have interactive Q&A with you. So please get the hardball questions out, the questions that you really want to ask and you're not getting answered. Start thinking about those, and we'll get to those in about 45 minutes after we've done our Q&A and also our presentations. So I'm going to kick things off with, is this the clicker? Oh, here, this one. Sorry. We have two clickers. Okay. So I was asked to give a quick introduction, and my intention is to keep this quick and short and really just whet our appetite for things to come. And I'm first going to do a quick plug. How many people have heard of Alchemist? Just from my own. Okay. So I wear two hats, and just as a quick background, let me go over both of those. So one hat is that I teach entrepreneurship in the engineering school at Stanford, and we put all of our classes on Stanford online, all of our guest lectures, and you can come and you can see them online at ecorner.stanford.edu. You're also welcome to come to the campus on Wednesdays at 4:30 p.m. and you can see who's speaking by going to ETL, or Entrepreneurial Thought Leaders, etl.stanford.edu. So if you want to go back to school, come to campus, come to the farm. and if you're from Berkeley, we don't necessarily buy. It's a rivalry by proximity. That's it. You guys are, but we have much love. My blood bleeds blue and gold as well as Cardinal. So you're welcome to come. You're welcome to come to campus too. Speaking of which, we funded many Berkeley alums through Alchemist, which is the other hat I wear, which is Alchemist is an accelerator just for the unsexy enterprise startups. All we do is enterprise, and we give you $36,000, and we run a 6-month program focused on a structured path towards fundraising and sales and customers. We're very proud to be backed by many of the top funds that are really shaping the enterprise space, and also many of the top corporates give us the money to give to you. And Alchemist, we've been very fortunate to have done fairly well. If you look at the rankings from 2016 by CB Insights, Alchemist companies have raised the most amount of money of their peers, of other accelerators. And so if you are interested in starting a company and you want a structured program, check out Alchemist. Okay, now let's get to AI and data centers. My background before I was a teacher and ran Alchemist was that I was a venture capitalist like Abhi, except at another fund called DFJ. And the issue whenever you're a VC is that, and if you're thinking about starting a company right now, rarely do you see companies that are bad ideas. It's rarely not, is my idea a good idea or a bad idea? It's almost, what's generally much more the case is the timing of the idea. Is this the time where your idea is going to actually take off? Or is this a wave that's going to actually pass and not become that big? And so the key question whenever we're looking at anything as a VC, or you as a founder, is why now? Why is now the time for me to start a company in this space? The beautiful thing about AI and data centers is that those are two big waves that everybody's talking about right now. There's a ton of attention being applied now to the data centers as well as to AI. And for good reason. We're seeing, as everybody knows, big data is exploding. So the amount of big data that's now ubiquitous, mainly because of a lot of social media and the ubiquity of phones, has driven a ton of unstructured data content. And that data, every 5 years, is growing by an order of magnitude. And there's different waves that are driving those shifts. The next wave can be come from a variety of areas. A lot of people are saying it's going to be IoT. And if you look at what's happening in the IoT trends, it will really be an avalanche over whatever happened in enterprise software. All the data that's coming out of connected devices is going to be building, it's going to be generating an order of magnitude more data. But amidst all this data, the big question that's arising is, how can we actually use it? So this is the best of times and it's the worst of times. We're flooded with data, but the issue is how much of that data is actually actionable or usable? What can you actually do with the data to actually create value? And that's both the challenge and the opportunity. And the wonderful thing about Silicon Valley is that whenever we're confronted with that challenge, it's also an opportunity to build big companies. We've seen that with previous waves that have come through, where other disruptions have created and rewarded companies that have become major stalwarts now in the ecosystem. And the same will hold true for this next explosion of big data. The question becomes, who are going to be the winners as we foray into this next phase, and how are those winners going to be orchestrated? The good news is that we're already seeing some winners emerge. So one of the indications of why the data center is becoming so attractive is if you look at the performance, for example, of NVIDIA. Over the last year, NVIDIA has tripled in value, whereas if you look at Intel and IBM, they've been flat. And that is, that's for a variety of reasons, and those are very big companies. But one of the reasons is because you're seeing NVIDIA's GPUs penetrate the data center. And suddenly now, a lot of the more real-time processing can be done by the GPUs, and you don't need server processing with the Intel chips as much. So you're seeing, even though both are growing, you're seeing NVIDIA kill it. And that's a good sign for the ability to bring AI into the data center. But even though we're seeing some good signs, there's more questions than there are answers. Because if you're a startup, there's questions around how do you attack the data center space? Do you go after a vertical strategy or a horizontal strategy? What part of the value chain do you attack? Do you go after, as we saw outside, there are companies that are thinking about AI through robotics and really dealing with the physical infrastructure issues, which are the key issues at the data center. And then, of course, we have more advanced AI platforms that are thinking about analytics and real-time intelligence. And then if you know how you want to attack it, then the question becomes, if you know where you want to attack it, then the question becomes how. Is AI just an overused term for data analytics? When we say AI, what do we really mean? And is AI a function of algorithms, or is it a function of data? And if to be successful, it's a function of data, then who wins? Is it the startups or is it the big incumbents? Many people would say that as much as we're talking about AI, we haven't really seen a startup that succeeded in AI. A lot of the big wins in AI have gone to Facebook and Amazon and Google, the big behemoth incumbent elephants and not the unicorns. So who will also win, and then how does that affect your choices? So good questions. and those questions and more will be answered in the next, hopefully, hour as we explore that and other facets of what's happening at the intersection of AI and data centers. And so, with that said, I'm now going to turn it over to our esteemed panelists. We have lined the panelists up from not necessarily least to most important, but from smallest fish or most emerging threat to sort of the stalwart power. So we're going to be going up the value chain of different people that are attacking the AI and data center space. And I've asked each of them to introduce themselves to you and then share their perspectives in 6 minutes on what they would like to impart to you before we kick off the Q&A.
So my name is Scott Noteboom, and my experience in the data center space is what drove my problem relative to AI. And having run data centers for a good number of years, first at Yahoo and then at Apple, it was kind of interesting that it was very human problems that drove the creation of my own company. Particularly because we had a fun time through the years dealing with a lot of the emerging technologies in the space as kind of two of those clouds grew pretty darn big. In the human challenge that I learned, which I think is really applicable through all enterprise, but kind of supercharged in the data center space, is really 2 words. First is always and everywhere. So when we say, modern business is turning global and it's everywhere, and modern business is 7 by 24, there's nowhere where that was more true than in the data centers. And so the first thing that I learned about artificial intelligence in the data center space was actually the limitation on natural intelligence. So when I look at our data centers growing up, some of the milestones that were pretty big is when I started at Yahoo, we had 22,000 servers in production. I thought it was the biggest things in the world. And we were in the kind of the NFL cities of the internet. In the US, it would be the Northern Virginia and the Silicon Valley. And when we open those data centers, say in the Equinix or our own site in these locations, we need about 200 man or woman years of natural intelligence to run this site. Network, system, storage, physical security, virtual security, electrical, mechanical, building safety systems. That existed in the Silicon Valley. When we moved and things started to get big and 22,000 servers in 31 countries started to turn into 14,000 server Hadoop single clusters in a single data center location, which again, that sounded big back then, started to occur in places like Wenatchee, Washington, and central Washington, because network was readily available, cost of electricity was cleaner. And what you found is that 200 man years of natural intelligence didn't exist in central Washington. How do we solve that problem? I got really good at the pitch. We're going to pay you Silicon Valley wages, and you're going to be able to move up into Prineville, Oregon, and buy a ranch and live a pretty darn good life. We relocated all of that natural intelligence. I remember at Apple standing in Chengdu, China, and we were figuring out, I was going through all the municipalities in the country and going, holy crap, on my skill sets that I needed, I also needed English language because it was our kind of international standard on top of all those mixture, network system storage, so on and so forth. And then I looked at my team and I thought, God, who's going to move to Chengdu? There was a lack of that experience, that 200 man years of experience. And when the cloud started to grow, everywhere and always was very supercharged, and it painted a very human challenge. So LitBit was created to solve that challenge. And the challenge that we were looking to solve is A, Natural intelligence is not everywhere. Natural intelligence does not grow as fast as the cloud grows. Natural intelligence isn't always. We're good for maybe a good 8 hours, maybe start to drift after lunch. How do we solve this with artificial intelligence? So what we've developed is, it started with the classic, if I could only clone, Sally and Nick and Lalo, and those are my best people. So what we did is we created a very easy human and machine learning platform, teaching platform. We believe the basis of machine learning begins with supervised learning. Why put a cloud of computers to figure out things that people have already figured out if they have 20 years of expertise? So how do we allow any subject matter expert in any of those silos, or even in other places of industry? You're a receptionist watching the front desk. Maybe you need something to watch the front desk when you're not there. You're a scientist in a pharmaceutical laboratory. So how do we enable all of those people, not programmers, not data scientists, to be able to train a platform? I've got a good eye. That's what this looks like. Subject matter expertise. I've got a good ear for things. This is what things sound like. I keep the pulse on things. This is what things look like or feel like. And then lastly, from a rules-based perspective, if this happens and this happens and this happens, this setting should be this, or this actuator should be in that condition. Sequences of operation in a data center. And then how, once we have that supervised learning, do we apply unsupervised learning to perfect the experience of people? So at the end of the day, coming from Apple, one of the funnest things was the Siri launch. And what you really learn the difference is while Siri and Alexa may have kind of a canned set of artificial intelligence, we take subject matter experts and we enable them to create their own Siri and Alexa that can be thought to process thoughts and gain knowledge and have skills that can interact with all the systems in the data centers, the Internet of Things, open APIs, to be able to take the experience and expertise that we have in the Silicon Valley and put it everywhere in Chengdu, China. So it really becomes, we call them personas. The employee can create a persona, which is an image of themselves and their own expertise, that can then be put to work anywhere in the world at all times. So that's what we're focused on at LitBit. Thanks.
Valentin, you can say from your chair if you want, or okay, whatever you'd like.
And you can call me Val.
Val, okay.
Keep it simple. So Peritus, before I even get into Peritus, I'll have to sort of give you a disclaimer. I'm trying to pull a Jack Dorsey or an Elon Musk here. I wear two hats. And the best analogy I can use to explain why that is because AI is a gold rush, certainly nowadays. And I've decided that my passion is around selling shovels and jeans. So I'm going to talk about the gold rush primarily tonight, and that's what I anticipate most questions on given the topic. But you'll find that the gold rush never happened without some of the logistics and supply chain behind it, so you might find me venturing into that area as well. So I represent Peritus here, Peritus.ai, and let me talk about the mission first and describe the origin of the name. I spent a pretty long career focused on applications development and fundamentally, back-end data center systems. The most recent 15, 20 years was in infrastructure and data center, primarily storage and data management. And the more the industry evolved, the more this word automation crept into the story. And marketers got a hold of it, and we see the term autonomous data center bandied about quite a bit. And most people here, I think, and most people in Silicon Valley are striving to attain the vision of a truly autonomous data center. And we've actually made significant progress over the last, I'd say, few years. If you take a look at what a data center should be doing nowadays, this is not running silos of disjointed applications. It should be service-oriented. So in terms of service management, we've done a really good job of delivering service management solutions to the marketplace to interface with the consumers of data center services. And if you take a look inside services, you take a look at things like automation of the orchestration and the provisioning of assets in a database, in a data center, we've done really well there as well. You've got, obviously, if you've paid attention to what's happened in Copenhagen this week in particular, There's a love fest, a kumbaya going on between two fairly tense rivals in the past, Docker and Google Kubernetes. And we've seen a pretty good standard emerge now for cloud native, forward-looking applications in terms of automating the orchestration of resources and assets in a data center. The monitoring industry, the APM industry is already quite fertile, alive and well, whether it's Science, Logic, New Relic, what have you. There's a lot of automation going on in that space. The S-word, Splunk, and things like that are pretty prevalent. So if you take a really harsh look at the autonomous data center, the vision is almost there. But there's just a huge glaring gap, a gaping hole that's still remaining in terms of really getting over the finish line. And that's in tech support, when things break. So in a perfect world, everything's automated, and we're following a deterministic path, and we kind of anticipate what's going along, and we have automation scripts and scenarios for all of that. But these are complex systems, multi-layered, lots of dependencies, lots of variability, unexpected demands sometimes, unexpected events in terms of power and cooling, what have you. Hurricanes happen and so forth. Unfortunately, flash fires, as we've seen here, happen as well. And so when things break, what do? There's no autonomy whatsoever. There's no automation whatsoever when you have to actually, tech support for me is this dreaded phone call to a data center, to a call center halfway across the world, and trying to explain who I am and what my operating system is and what my environment looks like. It's tedious, it's time-consuming, it's open-ended, it's non-deterministic, and the biggest problem is it's human-centric. There's just too much curated knowledge in the brains of field and escalation and tech support engineers that are required on a critical path towards solving this problem. So Peritus, for those of you up on your Latin, is Latin for expert. And Peritus AI is a virtual expert as opposed to or contrasted with a virtual assistant. The virtual expert has a deeper knowledge base, a deeper subject matter. And our mission at Peritus is to accumulate, these are data-rich environments, so accumulate all sorts of telemetry and knowledge about the various products and solutions inside a data center. Be able to train various knowledge models, whether they're semantic graphs or whether they're neural networks or a combination thereof. And then apply all of those knowledge models into a decision engine that can walk through a conventional ITSM tech support flowchart. And in context, for every case, make intelligent decisions about what to do at every junction point in a flowchart, and keep progressing as far down the path automatically of a typical tech support incident management situation until certainly today you kind of have to escalate to a human expert to kind of wrap it all up and make sure that all the grunt work was done by the automated system. The proposed recipe or resolution makes sense for the customer, and then perhaps even go ahead and automatically apply the fix. So Peritus is about making these very scarce resources, these level 3 or level 4 tech support engineers, making them a lot more productive, improving customer satisfaction by narrowing that, the case time, closing the window on case times. And the last thing I'll conclude with here, since I'm out of time, is that you have to imagine now that it's not a one-for-one replacement. You can deploy thousands of AI bots simultaneously, as opposed to just one human at a time. So the unit of work in AI is no longer defined by a human. The unit of delivery in AI is no longer defined by a human. And now as a business, you can offer customers a whole bunch of custom shrink-wrapped entitlements that they've never been able to purchase before by virtue of fully leveraging AI. And in a tech support context, that's what Peritus AI is all about.
Thank you, Val. Next, we have Tom.
Hi, good evening. My name is Tom Vo. I'm serving as a director of engineering at Ericsson. Just a raise of hands, how many of you guys think AI is no longer science fiction? Right? Like today, pretty much the last couple of days, you turn on any web pages, you're going to hear about AI, right? But my journey started out 4 years ago. I was really lucky to meet the CEO and founder of Noteboom. This is the company that got acquired by Ericsson last year. I had a dinner with him in San Francisco, and he told me this vision about a data center in the future, right? And it got me really excited. His background worked for Dell, Cisco. He supplied server to data center, and he realized there's a lot of inefficiency in the way we operate data center. just the, if you know much about data center, the life cycle management, from procurement, bootstrap, power up, networking, firmware upgrades. This is go on and on. Once even up and running, you're just trying to maintain this. Every 3 years you got to upgrade your servers. It's just on and on. Unless you're one of those, Google or Facebook, you struggle through this. You hire a bunch of engineers, DevOps or operators, write a bunch of scripts, and he found an opportunity to solve his problems. But what intrigued me the most was like his vision about this data center in the future, right? Just curious, have you guys walk into a data center today? Why, right? Why do you think the rack is only 6 foot tall? That's because it was built for human, right? Why is there LED in the front panel? That's to show the power is on, for human to see that. USB slots. So everything we've seen today is built for human to operate a data center. What if you take what if you have to, just build a data center for tomorrow? What would it be? Anybody want to give a try? Exact, or 30-foot rack. You don't need air cool. You don't need oxygen, where you don't need fire suppression, because you will be having drones or robotic arms just going out and replacing the memory DIMMs before it would become a problem. Can you imagine that, right? So this is the future of a data center. We don't know how long we're going to get there, but having a visions, build automation, predictive maintenance, that was his visions. So we went out building, set of software tools and starting collecting data. I think even collecting data itself is a problem. It's a huge challenge in a data center because you work with a legacy machine. I mean, it's hardware dependency. I don't know if you guys know much about the server technology. It's just every server comes with various flavors of CPU, memories, hard drives, packages. A typical Linux has over 900 packages software, right? So how do you maintain that? How do your performance degrade over time? How do you know what's going on, right? So a lot of these things require human skills to solve, like expertise. But we know we can't solve this with human over time. We need to figure out the smarter ways. So at that time, we also work with Ericsson. They're building out they call HDS, Hyperscale data center, based on Intel rack scale architecture. This is very advanced architecture, and then we were so glad to be working with them. And a year later, we got acquired by Ericsson. So today we continue building software for Ericsson. It's a great company. They're solving this big problem right now with the telecom space, the 5G, the next generation networking, where the requirement for data center is very different today. So I'm very excited to be here, serving these panels. Have some experience in data center, the challenges that we have. I think the data center of tomorrow will be very different that we'll be seeing today. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And finally, Abhi. Yep.
Hi, everybody. My name is Abhi Shalom. I'm an investor with Battery Ventures. I co-head our enterprise infrastructure investment practice. And thank you, Ravi, for the very kind words, vulture capitalist. I wish I could say that I haven't heard that before, but I have. I've also heard very capitalist, which is probably all fair in some sense. But one of the things that Ravi mentioned when I walked in was, you're going to be the voice of Sandhill today. And I don't know how I feel about that, but I'll try and present both views of the world in a fairly objective manner, both the VC side and the entrepreneur side. So my background, real quick, I've prior to being a vulture capitalist, I was an operator for many years, over a decade. I was one of the early research engineers at Qualcomm and was part of the team that incubated LTE. So if you guys have a lot of drop calls, blame it on me. I was a failed engineer, which is why I ended up being a venture capitalist. So I wanna just introduce tonight's topic with a couple of points. First is AI real, right? If somebody gave me $10 for every company I met that said they did AI, I'd be making a lot more money as a VC, doing that than being a VC. So I've almost lost count of the number of companies that tout of having AI capability. So the first question is AI real? And to that, I want to kind of draw the analogy to where big data was 4 or 5 years ago. If you looked at the big data ecosystem 4 or 5 years ago, everybody was talking about Hadoop. Everybody was talking about what the new big data stack is going to look like. Oh, you have all this social data coming in. You have clickstream data coming in. You have ERP system data coming in. You have IoT data. How do you go and archive all this data? Teradata is not going to work. Oracle is not going to work. And so big data became this new phenomenon. So if any one of you ever visited the Strata Big Data Conference, you couldn't tell one startup from the other. They were all saying the same thing. And VCs, known for not being very innovative, ended up spending over $10 billion in 1 year funding big data startups, right? And so there's a lot of noise around that ecosystem. What we're starting to see in the last couple of years is that noise is starting to settle down. I think the stack is starting to emerge. The middleware technologies are starting to be baked in. The hardware technologies that go underneath are starting to be baked in. So the entire middleware stack for big data feels more or less settled. There's still obviously going to be the laggards of enterprises that are still trying to figure out their way in big data. But for the most part, it's not just the web-centric companies, but you're starting to see a lot of the Fortune 500 companies that have also figured out what their next, for the next decade, big data stack is going to look like. So now that has happened, and now with the advent of the cloud and how accessible compute is, whether it's Azure, AWS, Google, or private cloud, now you're starting to see the beginnings of what is now, called AI. Now, AI has existed in many forms all along, but the thing that makes AI more accessible today than many years ago is the fact that we now have a very scalable big data stack that is in place. And number two, we have high performance compute available by a swipe of a credit card. So if somebody asks me, is AI real? I think AI is real. I think it's doable. I think the technology and the infrastructure is out there to go build an AI capable company, right? So now the second question is, if we now all agree that AI is there, what type of an AI company do you want to build, and how do you want to position it? So my advice to anybody out here who's thinking of starting a company and is thinking of starting a company specifically in AI is you can go do AI, but don't tell everyone you're doing AI. And the reason I say that is, just to use an anecdote, one of my portfolio company CEOs that I was a founding investor in, he came up with this idea saying, hey, I have only 3 companies that I see on Google search that I think are competitors to me. So I'm pretty well positioned, but I don't have AI in my technology. I need to start branding my company as an AI company. I was like, why don't you kick it off and see how it goes? So he rebrands his whole thing, starts using AI terminology. He works on his SEO and SEM strategies. And then 2 months later, he comes back to me and says, my competitive landscape went from 3 companies to 21 companies. So long story short, whether somebody's doing AI or not, they're going to obviously tell you they're going to do AI. And so as you think about starting your company, focus on what the competitive moat is, what the innovation is that you're trying to bring to fore, as opposed to thinking about what the messaging of the company should be. Because at the end of the day, words are cheap and action is real. And I think we do have all the tools today with whether it's compute, whether it's the big data stack, whether it's AI open source frameworks like Caffe or TensorFlow or what have you. The framework is there. So find a nice, unique problem set that you think you're in a unique position to solve, and then go leverage the technology that we have at our disposal today to go solve it. That would make for a successful outcome. So with that, I'll open it up.
Thank you, Abhi. I'll start with our valued capitalist. Because we have so many founders in the crowd. If you've been working on a company that is in the data center and the AI space, how do you know if you're at a point where you're fundable? At what point does it make sense for you to reach out where you can say, okay, now I'm fundable, or what makes your eyes light up as a valued venture capitalist when a company comes and pitches you?
Yeah, for sure. And before I answer that question, I just want to take a minute to thank Ravi. I think he's done a phenomenal job with his Alchemist program. One of the things that us VCs rely on is any kind of indication of reducing the noise to signal ratio, and programs like his help promote the right kind of companies for us to go focus on. So thank you. In terms of what we look for in companies in AI, I think all the trends we talked about and my esteemed panelists mentioned here with regards to automation in the enterprise are real. There's a few different attributes that we look for in a team that's looking to go solve a problem in automating the enterprise. One of the first things that I believe in is if you're going to go build a horizontal AI technology that competes with TensorFlow or Caffe, that is a stance that we will find very hard to back, because you could have the best data scientist in your team, you could have the latest Stanford PhD, freshly minted coming out and helping you and joining you as a co-founder, but it's still going to be very hard to have a long-term competitive moat, because the FANG companies, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, always have the resource to go spend $500,000 or $1 million a year on a top-notch data scientist and build a technology that's better. So if to the extent you can, stay away from building horizontal platforms and trying to tout yourself as a better algorithm. So if possible, stay away from that. Try and identify vertical use cases within, whether it's the data center or whether it's outside the data center, that you can uniquely go solve, right? And so with that context, I'll start my second point, which is the founding team. I think given how early the AI landscape is, a lot of the companies we end up meeting are either the seed or A stage. We haven't met a lot of growth stage AI companies, obviously. And so at that stage of investment, the founding team becomes very critical. So some of the DNA that we look for in the founders that we back are, number one, do you have the right AI DNA? So do you come from either one of the web scale companies, the FANG companies, where you've built Facebook's learner flow, technology, so you have the learnings that you can go reapply to a new problem, or maybe you're, a Stanford PhD, or maybe a PhD from a very respectable university that has a cred for AI, where you've worked on these problems before. So that's the first attribute. The second attribute we look for, which is very often neglected, is do you have the right domain expertise? Do you have somebody who's coming from that industry, right? So if, for example, one of the panelists here talked about ITSM and solving the ticketing system or the ServiceNow system of the world using AI, well, if you haven't worked at a ServiceNow, if you haven't worked at a Zendesk or what have you, it's very hard for us to relate to say that you're actually going to find a problem that you can solve, because there's a lot of unique domain expertise that's required, be it sales cycles within the industry, be it buying decisions, being usage behavior. There's a lot of domain expertise that comes to the fore in building a technology that's adoptable. And so the two attributes we always look for is somebody who has the AI expertise and somebody who has the unique domain expertise to go build something there. And the third thing that I'll say that that we look for, in addition to the top two I mentioned, is the urgency in the market, right? We've met with founders, very bright guys, and I have deep respect for every founder that I ever meet, whether we do the deal or not, because they put a lot of their time and value, at stake when they go start a company. And so, they could be doing a lot of other things with their time. So the opportunity cost for every founder that we meet is very high. And so we have deep respect for every founder we meet. But I find a lot of founding teams with a lot of capability, but they end up solving problems that might be nice to have, but are not must-have problems, right? So for example, I met a founder once that was trying to change the mining industry, right? So he was trying to figure out a smarter way to go, build inventory analysis for mining sites, right? And so it's honestly a great idea. You could go tell how much copper somebody has mined, or how much, maybe rare materials or minerals people are mining. But the question is the buyer, is a plant manager who's been doing this for 20 years or 30 yeers, Are they going to find that exciting? Yeah, maybe it helps them make a decision slightly faster, but are they going to stop everything that they're doing and use your problem or use your solution? Probably not, right? And so identifying a problem that's urgent in nature, that there's an immediate buyer for, there's an existing budget for. If you talk about ticketing, there's an immediate budget. People spend money on ServiceNow today.
And I'm going to move forward. This is good. This is all good just because we have a limited amount of time.
So,
but just to get things clear, though, and I want to just get some data points for people that are in the audience right now. The rest of the panelists as well, if you want to chime in on your experience with fundraising and what you needed. Do you need revenue, Abhi? So do you have to have a certain amount of revenue before you approach a VC?
I don't think so.
You don't need so, yeah. So,
not in this space.
So if you have the right team and you're at an urgent market that's big enough, you can get funded. And I don't know if anybody wants to share their data points on when they got funded, what they had in terms of traction or team.
Maybe one other thing that I can add to that really excellent set of observations is timing is key. If you can happen to have some what I call tailwinds in your favor. So recent developments in the ecosystem, recent platforms that are made available, things that save you time, things that de-risk what you're doing. So it's more than just timing. It's having almost a bit of an unnatural advantage in addressing the problem you have. That's extremely helpful in terms of really being able to get to the solution and not just focus on a level of technology.
Okay, terrific. I'm going to push it to Tom. Tom, just dovetailing off of what Abhi was saying about how there's so much noise out there on AI. In your mind, is AI just advanced analytics, or is there something that is a discontinuous difference between incrementally better analytics and AI? And if so, what is that? And then the follow-up question is, you've now been on both sides. You're at Ericsson now. You were a startup founder before. To date, the big four companies have captured most of the AI innovation. Do you think that the big companies just keep getting bigger when it comes to AI, or are you bullish on the startups? And if you're bullish on the startups, if you were going to start a company today, where would you start one?
Yeah, I think answer the first questions. I think definitely there's some noise, especially when 4 years ago you don't hear much of the AI, right? You might have heard machine learnings, big start out with big data analytics, big analytics. And suddenly people pivoting their company to AI company, and just like I said, put some brand into the marketing, and then when you look deeper into their the way they come up with the output, it's just mainly just looking at the past, not predicting what the future, that type of thing. So you have to really ask, when the company's saying, I have AI to look into your data and improve your business type of thing. You got to see, is this going to be something that just a respin of the old analytics, pivoting table, spreadsheet type of thing, or actually they have some smart algorithm, proven accuracy to kind of do some predictions.
Scott, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah.
Sorry, Scott, you can speak from your.
Just a real simple thought.
Yeah.
In that regard is, for a lot of years when we've been using technology, we've been using and building technology as a tool. And you go, what does that mean? A tool is actually an inanimate object without the hands that operate it. So to me, the transition into artificial intelligence actually represents the transition of technology from being a tool to a teammate, where a teammate is able to do things on their own, effectively the tool and the intelligence combined together, that doesn't require so much of the hand to continue for it to be useful in any means.
Okay, that's good. Tom?
So yeah, second questions, good question. I think I've been both sides of small startup get acquired by company. I think depends on the vertical again. I know it's pretty common now. Like that it's very hard to hire data science because most of the smart data science people, they would just get gobbled out by the big five, right? But I think because in a small startup you do have agility, you have people that want to make change. I feel like it depends on a vertical that you have. You can succeed. But ultimately, probably the outcome is going to get acquired by another company. Because just a challenge to get successful as a standalone the AI company, you need to have a lot of data, and that's part of the big trust. How to get overcome the initial trust that people willing to give you data and have the infrastructure to collect the data. Right?
Can I? And I know, Abhi, you might have some thoughts on this as well, but I want to push on this point that Tom brought up. Do you guys think that the winning AI companies are the ones that have the most data? Or can you win without the data, and if so, how? Yeah.
I mean, I just put my money where my mouth is on that, right? I realized early on that, as we've all kind of said here, the elephant in the room, and the reason the FANG are the FANG, and we haven't included Tesla here, we haven't included private companies like Uber and Airbnb, the standout winners, the common denominator is they have access to these massive data sets. It's not their algorithms. It's not even their staff. It's the data they've managed to get access to. And there's this old axiom inside Google, right? It's big data, small algorithms. If you have a lot of data, you can do so much. You don't need a complex algorithm. Fortunately, there are some pretty impressive algorithms available to you and pretty impressive machine learning and deep learning services on demand with a swipe of a credit card, but it all comes down to the data. It all comes down to access to the differentiated data because everyone has access to public data sets.
Scott.
So that's where the action is.
I think it goes along with the question of, can the startups compete against the big companies? And my belief tends to be that when you're looking at the horizontal or general problems, I don't think that's where the startups should focus because that drives the general data and the horizontal technology stack, which the big guys are really good at. What the big guys aren't really good at is the verticals that involve very specific expertise, very specific knowledge, and very specific data. And that's where the startups come into play. And it's a combination of that data and the people who have that expertise that will drive that market.
And Abhi, yeah.
I want to make a quick point. I 100% agree that if you own the data asset, you own a lot of strategic value. But the reason why the big five are successful with AI is not just because they have all the data. They also have the agility and the DNA to go make something happen with that data. As an example, if you wanted to compete with Amazon, you could go to Walmart and say, Walmart, why don't you go start an e-commerce website, walmart.com, and go compete with them. Can they compete? Probably not, because there's a lot of other things that happen behind the scenes with A/B testing and customer experience and the like to make it successful. So by the same vein, you could go to a Caterpillar or a JP Morgan and slap the best AI algorithm and say, hey, now go be the best AI-enabled company. Will they? They probably won't, because there's a lot of other things that need to happen behind the scenes, like building out the stack, making sure that you have a unified data, infrastructure within for that to happen. So I would take the alternative stance, saying yes, data is important, but there's a lot of behind the scene DNA that needs to go in to be able to extract value from that asset.
So just to push on that, then, if you were a startup and everybody's telling you to focus on, if you believe that the data is a critical part to being successful as an AI startup, how do you hack the process to give yourself an advantage? And if you say focus on a vertical, how do you respond when you focus on a vertical and the VCs say, oh, this isn't that big? So you're sort of damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you focus on a vertical, people will say, oh, this isn't that big of a market. And if you focus on a horizontal, people will say you're not focused. How do you resolve that, Ravi? I'm going to give this to our value venture.
Big vertical.
Big vertical. That's actually probably the right answer. This vertical is $1 billion, and the next one's going to be $10 billion. Is that how you?
Wow, you're being really nice to me today. But no, I think it's a fair question. I would say that it depends on the problem you're trying to solve. So if you're trying to build an autonomous driving, company, then you are probably starting out at a disadvantage, because Google and Uber are going to put out, thousands of cars out there collecting real-time data that's going to help them build the best autonomous driving technology. If you're an autonomous driving startup, you're going to have to raise $100 million before you even know if the product is worth its salt. So that's a losing proposition in my opinion. But there are certain problem sets out there where after a certain amount of data, the marginal value of the new data that you add is very small. And so if you can identify those problem sets where you can get by with just the right amount of data, where maybe partnering with or piloting with certain enterprises who are being friendly to startups can give you access to that data, then go after those problem sets. And that's one way to go mitigate the lack of data problem that we talked about.
Okay, I'm going to ask one or two more questions, but I want to encourage everybody to submit their questions now, because we're going to turn it over to the audience in about 5 minutes. So send your questions, and we will do some real-time interaction. So just dovetailing off of what Abhi was saying, if you were going to start a company right now, is there an under-the-radar opportunity that you think is going to be big in the next 10 years that nobody's paying attention to, or a hack to overcome the barriers that we've talked about that you think entrepreneurs aren't exploiting? Anybody want to?
Center related?
Data center related, ideally. Yeah, data center and AI related.
So I've been doing data center stuff for a long time, and what it reminds me of is I would say the cloud is the equivalent of the mainframe era of data center. And what I noticed is when we got into the cloud, it was really two things that enabled the cloud to happen. One was higher performance flat network performance, and number two was automated resource scheduling. So when I look at things and realize the original intention of the internet was this beautifully distributed network that for some reason sits in very strategic big buildings that keep getting bigger and bigger. So outside of the space that I'm interested in is I'm a big believer that in 10 years, big centralized buildings for data centers, and this is going to be fueled by technology stacks that work on smaller versions of electronics that have much higher performance from a network perspective. If we extended from the backplane, single server, the network enabled us to extend to a cluster that had to be within a couple hundred feet into each other. That distance is going to extend. So I believe that the big box data centers in 10 years will begin to not exist, and data center topology itself will become truly distributed. So I think interesting things there.
That's great. Other ideas?
I think for me, the short term would be predictive workload. I think, believe it or not, there are a lot of data centers still operating at 60 or 50% efficiency. They're just having reserve rack of machine for holiday seasons or peak time. I think that's kind of near term. And the long term, just the way the servers are the hardware architecture today is not very efficient. Intel, they come out with the rack scale design architecture where you can disaggregate the hardware to separate composable components. You can go to Intel and get for more information. I think that's kind of a future way to get more apply intelligence to the data center.
Thanks, Tom. Abhi?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. The one area that I'm passionate about in the enterprise, where I think AI can come in really handy, is the area of cybersecurity. We just saw the Equifax breach that just happened, and in one day, $20 billion of market cap was wiped out because of the breach. Just imagine the enormity of that impact. And I think the reason why AI is so critical in that vertical is because it's very hard to keep up with the zero-day attacks. It's very hard to keep up with state-sponsored cyber terrorism, whether it's coming from China or Russia or other countries, or even within the U.S. And so I think AI has a lot to offer in that spectrum. So just think about it for a second. An average enterprise has a security operations team, and this security operations team, on an average, spends about 400 hours a week just dealing with false alarms. So these are alarms or time that's wasted on things that yield absolutely nothing. So if you have a system, whether it be a model or a chatbot or what have you, that could come in, be the first line of defense that looks at all these alerts, helps prioritize them, helps get rid of the false alarms, and brings a human only when a critical problem needs to be solved, that would be a huge ROI for these enterprises. There's two problems to be solved. One is that there's a lot of attacks, so you need to go address it. And the second thing is cybersecurity talent is always, there's always a shortage for that talent. And so enterprises are always trying to hire people in this domain. So I think AI, could add instant value from an ROI perspective. So I'm very excited about cybersecurity.
Val, do you have a quick comment?
Let me respectfully disagree with that just for fun. So the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I think, I'm just going to be controversial here. I apologize in advance if you're a security professional, but you should be embarrassed, right? Everyone's data, mine, yours, our organizations, our parent companies, our governments, has already been breached many times over. The headlines today couldn't be more consistent. And the focus is all wrong. It's been on infrastructure, secure the infrastructure, and add more intelligence and AI to the infrastructure. The value, the only thing of lasting value in all this infrastructure, I'm a broken record here, is the data. We need a data-first approach. We need to think of all sorts of scenarios around how people ransomware and encrypt the data on-prem or breach and leak the data off-prem. Secure the data first, and the infrastructure optionally secondary. And that's a mentality that's been lacking in the industry. It's a mentality that's going to be necessary in the future. And we can apply AI techniques. We can apply all sorts of conventional techniques. If I were you, I'd Google a recent term I just read about called crypto anchor. There's lots of data-first ways, data-centric ways to secure what matters, which is the data. And I think it's just foolhardy to keep getting more clever and acute at securing infrastructure when we've proven that the castle walls are porous and the castle walls have been breached over and over again.
I'm going to move forward, Abby, just because we have a lot of questions.
No worries.
But don't worry, you can come in. You guys each get final closing 6 words. So you guys can each get the last word for 6 words at the end. I'm looking at some of the questions and some threads, and one thing that's I know has popped up is one of the things I want to explore is this idea of if you do go down the AI path, is there a bias towards emergent AI versus directed AI? So, for example, Scott, when you were talking about having the guided learning protocols, whereas Val, you had these virtual assistants. In Silicon Valley, I think we have the hubris of thinking that technology trumps all, that technology trumps humans. When it comes to AI, and then the later discussion is going to go around the implications of this, do you guys have a bias of what wins? Is it technology will trump humans, or is it technology plus humans? Any reactions to that? Yes, Scott.
I'll go. So I think it's a complement to each. It's a combination of the two, and I think where humans underestimate ourselves is how AI is going to augment our capabilities. So when we look at the risks, we look at the risks from today's perspective, and today's perspective is primitive compared to what AI is going to enable us to do. Now, relative to where AI is going to affect things the most, what I found is when we're working with a oil platform engineer in the Gulf of Mexico, or we're working with a pharmaceutical scientist in Bar Harbor, Maine, the knowledge and the expertise that they have, or even the product person of a technology startup, really what you have is you have a lot of ingenuity, a lot of creativity, and a lot of experience. Where when I look at AI, the biggest threat, if we do things right in AI, tends to be your left brain type thinking, which would be your math, computational cortex kind of scenario. When you think of things, that the job of the engineering and technology organization should be to outdate themselves, because AI is actually perfect at doing critical thinking, engineering, mathematical, and computational tasks. And we live in an environment where engineers and technology companies serve nothing more as a middleman between experts and computers, because they're taught to think like a computer, code like a computer, and isn't the job of AI to bridge that gap to enable the true experts in fields outside of technology to create their own apps of the future without having to have someone who speaks code in the middle of them.
And let me just see where the panel, so you guys all know this conception of the singularity, that we're going to hit this criticality where the evolution of machines is going to outpace our ability to predict it. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 means you violently agree, 1 means you violently disagree. With a show of hands, can I just see on the panel who thinks that the singularity will occur? Just whether or not it will occur on a scale of whether there will be a singularity.
Time scale.
Huh?
The textbook year is 2042 on that event?
Is it that late? Is it 2042? Okay, but I just want to, this is sort of more just binary. Does the panel believe that that point will occur on a scale of 1 to 5? Ready, set, go. Can I just see where people stand?
Let me tell you why I believe that.
Val, 1 second. I just want to see where people stand. Can you show me with your hands, guys, where you at? So Val's a 5. Tom, what are you? I can't see you.
No.
Are you a 1?
No, I don't. I don't believe it.
You don't believe in that the singularity occur. And Abhi?
Yeah, it depends on the time scale. If it's in the next 20 years, I'd say no. So 1.
And in the next 40 years?
I'd say 2.
Oh, so in the next what? So
human will triumph.
What's your time frame, Abhi? When do you think it happens?
I won't be around, but maybe the next 100 years. Yeah.
The next 100 years. Okay. So one of the questions that's been lobbed from the audience is, and just to read it, that with AI comes high expectations and responsibilities with a jobless future. What's the panel's view of that challenge? So if AI takes off, and especially with robotics in the data center as a more immediate issue, you're going to be displacing all those data center employees. Are you guys bearish or bullish on an AI future? Does that mean that we're all just luxuriating and getting government stipends because we don't have to work, because the robots are doing all the work, or is it a grim future with AI?
200 years ago, 99% of us would have worked in agriculture. Today in the US, less than 2% work in agriculture. That is what AI is going to do to the job marketplace. And the reason being is most of us as people, many of us as people, are focused on doing jobs that machines should be doing. One of the things that I've learned a lot working in AI is the shortcomings of AI. I see a resurgence in arts and humanities, the strengths of being more human, and maybe a less importance of mathematical engineering, quite frankly, to hold myself to the math-related tasks. So effectively what we're going to do is let machines be more like machines so we can focus on being more human, which is going to allow us to learn a heck of a lot more things and take humanity to a next level. I'm optimistic.
Terrific. Do we have any Elon Musks in the crowd or any on the panel?
So let me sort of give you not quite an Elon Musk perspective, but here's one of the reasons why I'm bullish on singularity in the shorter term. And it's the fact that our brains aren't wired to understand the premise of singularity. Singularity is exponential progress. Humans are wired for, at best, linear progress and projection into the future in a linear sense. So, 4 cycles from now, it's like 16 times better. 5 cycles is 32 and so forth. I just think that if we keep looking at exponential progress, which has been proven historically, from at least the Industrial Revolution to today, we're entering that steep part of an exponential curve, very steep part. So I think 5 years from now, especially 10, and in my lifetime, I'm quite confident we will reach a singularity, if you just do the math. That's the Elon Musk side of me. I also completely agree with Scott here. The closer you get, I can't even call it artificial intelligence. There's nothing intelligent about the state of the industry today. It's fundamentally deep learning. And the closer you get to deep learning, the more pedestrian and mundane it really becomes. And what you realize is when you have good labeled data and you're able to do supervised training, you can automate an incredible amount of tasks, one by one. But to try and get any awareness of what one task means in relation to the other is nearly impossible today. So the whole context awareness, before we even get into the humanities and sort of the more human side of the world, it's not there in the science yet. It's not there in the solutions yet. Even Alexa is just a specific chain, a very specific tasks linked together, and it does that chain very, very well. You ask it to deviate anywhere outside of that chain, it'll fall completely flat on its face. So AI today, which is really deep learning, has a long way to go to get broader and more applicable to a lot of things. Yes, I think it's a sliding scale and it's going to replace task-oriented work first. And I believe in the singularity, so it will get exponentially better over time. But I think that, as Scott said, there's a long runway for us here. And the more nuanced your work is, the more you have to be cross-domain in your thinking for work or other things, and the more your job is secure, because we're reaching a plateau. If you talk to any of the godfathers in AI today, we've reached a deep learning plateau, and the science now needs to evolve beyond that.
Thank you. Tom, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, just to me, just disparity. You look at the world, we are living this despair. Many countries still developing. There are still people in the U.S. Jobs are not created equal. So I think that somehow we need to solve that problem as well. We live in the Silicon Valley, so it's easy to talk about artificial intelligence, but if go anywhere else in the other part of the world, probably we're just going to be doing the same thing. So we have to take that into consideration.
Yes, thank you, guys. I'm gonna. There's a lot of questions around getting really tactical on specific use cases with AI in the data center, and so I'm going to ask now to move from being conceptual in thoughts to just giving to feeding the crowd with tactical use cases that you would go after. So if you were an engineer or if you were a founder and you were looking for specific use cases to apply AI in the data center to, very tactical specific use cases, what would you go after? especially things that might be underserved or underlooked. Yes.
Cabling.
Okay, and give tactical details on that. And what
So
do you
it's
mean?
I'm guilty of this because I worked for a vendor that did this, but there's certain cables, whether they're optical or whether they're copper, that have the exact same connector and do fundamentally different things. One might connect you to a storage shelf, and the other might connect you to a network switch. And if you cross those wires, you can not only short one of those devices, you could just totally mess up an entire rack of service. So just the mundanest of things in a data center, the ability to have an artificially intelligent assistant tell you exactly which cable, perhaps it's color-coded, perhaps it isn't, which cable goes in which slot as you're actually racking and stacking a system. It's the most base-level thing that is still error-prone because it's human-centric. That's an easy one right there.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, thank you for the question. This is something that we are trying to solve. Right now is many data center, we're still running server or VMs or container, very inefficient. So we call it zombie. These are the machine that actually sucking up powers but doesn't do anything useful. People creating VMs and then they just left it running. They might have CPU utilization might be up, but then not do anything useful. So be able to detect, CPUs up high, but there's no network traffic. So what's going on? There's no transaction. There's even nobody actually owned that virtual machine. So constantly, Google has a really good, overnight it can actually go and clean up these runaway process or runaway VMs or machines, and that is like low-hanging fruits, and we're trying to solve that problem right now with our software.
That's terrific. Other thoughts? Abi, did you? Or if you guys don't, it's fine. But I just want to make sure. Yes.
Tom reminded me of something. Do you want to go? Tom reminded me of something. It's an anecdote I heard, but I actually think it's more common than we think. Orphaned or random processes that actually end up doing crypto mining. So I've heard that more than once, where data center administrators do notice unnaturally high CPU spikes and GPU spikes, and you really want to watch out for people doing unauthorized things that are not in the interest of the parent company owning the asset.
Let me actually jump off of that because we have a question around the blockchain that somebody asked that we've talked about AI and we've talked about data centers and the future of storage, and I haven't heard a mention of blockchain and the future of decentralized storage, one another for storage. Can you speak on ideas for 10 years from now when the Internet of Things of real and decentralized storage and cryptocurrencies can allow us to pay, and what opportunities, if anybody sees of any opportunities with how blockchain, or does not, or if you're bearish? Tom seems like he has a reaction to this. Tom?
Blockchain is the big topic right now, and I don't know if the audience want to talk about blockchain at this point.
Well, we had one question. I don't know if it resonates with others, but maybe if we can just get, I think some of the specific threads that came out from the audience, or one was on blockchain, another was on legacy enterprises, and are there opportunities around either blockchain or legacy enterprises or other opportunities that you guys think can branch off of data centers and AI?
So I think we said, we're kind of universal agreement on the panel here that AI is cool, but it's really only valuable or monetizable when you apply it to a problem. Mm-hmm. So I'd say the exact same thing about blockchain. I'm super bullish. I think it's incredibly cool. I've got a whole portfolio of cryptocurrencies myself because I need to be in this. But it's not about falling in love with the technology. The technology is actually one of the more soap opera-ish, controversial sets of technologies I've ever encountered myself. But on the other hand, the applicability of it is undeniable. And we've seen already almost every enterprise, fintech and healthcare and others, have adopted the core concept of distributed ledgers and decentralized systems without single authorities that could be compromised. And it's really, the problems we're solving, and if you want to get into it, particular coins you're trading, that's where things get interesting. But I don't think there's any doubt about the value today and the future of the concept of blockchain.
Terrific. Abi?
Look, I think it's an interesting question. We've tried to play this broader cryptocurrency space in a variety of different ways, but I think blockchain, the technology as a whole has a pretty pivotal role to play in the enterprise, especially when it comes to identity and access management. Because if you think about the way corporate employees log into enterprise systems today, it's not just from their traditional laptops, but they're using their personal phones, they're using IoT devices. And then beyond people, you also have APIs and entities that are logging into your systems, right? If you're talking about a world of interconnected APIs, every API is its own identity. And so I think with that, that scale, the traditional way of having a central repository for identity and access is not going to work. So having a decentralized ledger, which is what blockchain offers, I think is very, very interesting. I think could be a very disruptive technology. And then coming back to the use case for, maybe for AI within enterprise broadly, somebody recently pitched me, this is a very smart guy, a PhD from Berkeley. He's just built a product that basically is an AI to replace software programmers. So I played around with it. I specified in literally natural language, in English language, what I wanted to build. And it just went and built a program in Node.js and in Python and whatever language I chose. And it just populated the code. And off the bat, in 5 minutes, suddenly I built this awesome application that was taking voice commands and executing on it. And so I wonder if we're going to end up in a recursive loop where software programmers build AI technology to replace software programmers. Anyway, something to think about.
Well, and just branching off of that, going then from the tactical use cases, are there more visionary or moonshot use cases that are more aspirational, where if no one was looking, you would start a company, or if you could wave a magic wand and start a company today, is there something that's a little bit less provable, but something that you in your gut think is sort of an aspirational, visionary, or moonshot type of thing to pursue? Tom?
I don't know, just watching movies, science fiction movies, I thought solving crimes before it happened, maybe a cool thing.
Oh yeah.
Just imagine today you're solving a lot of problem in the airport. I mean, all the lines, you can predict who's causing the problem, and you kind of fill it out instead of having everyone treated the same way. I think that's a cool time to be in.
Yeah, one moonshot idea that I have, it's more humanitarian and social versus classic enterprise. But I know nothing about healthcare. I'm not a pharmaceutical professional. But I think AI has potentially a huge impact. Could have a huge impact on healthcare in general. If you think about clinical research, a lot of these large pharma companies, they spend $10, $20, $30 billion in R&D, and once they have a breakthrough chemical composition, they milk that formula for years to come. They have, I don't know who they lobby within Congress, but they get those rights to, those patent rights for years before anybody could go manufacture it. And so a lot of developing poor countries are deprived of getting access to first-class medicine because of these rules that are in place. And so if we can have a technology disruptor that can expedite the process of clinical research, we can level the playing field across not just the big pharma companies, but across any pharma company across the world. So innovation in medicine can happen faster, and we can hopefully solve global hunger and diseases.
Yeah, Scott.
I think once we have a proper horizontal, and I think relative to the horizontal technology stack, lots of cool big companies working on it. I just want to kind of build off of what you said, Abhi. So coming from Apple, definitely had a lot of work in understanding the app ecosystem relative to the mobile revolution. I think that most people in the future will relate to AI based on intelligence and expertise. So when I look at things, I think, and it builds upon the software developers of the future don't speak in code, because when you start reaching singularity and you have this exponential growth of expertise, and commodities are a computer that grows exponentially, why don't we get these computers not speaking code but speaking human? So the way that I view the AI revolution is defined by AI personas, and those AI personas need to be created by people that have that expertise. So again, just to underline, I really think that's a big part of the future.
It's the personas, yeah. Yeah.
And I'd say, first of all, I have to agree with Avi. I mean, there's no more noble use case than curing cancer faster, particularly, children's cancer and things like that, applying it to clinical studies and so forth. one of the moonshot things I'm working on is just a question that bugs me, which is, I read The Economist and Wall Street Journal, and they're telling me data is the new oil and data is the new gold. So I go, okay, if I go to the gas station, I know what price of a gallon of gas costs. If I want to buy an ounce of gold, I go on the markets and I know exactly what I'm going to pay for that. But if I point to any data set, on my phone, in a data center somewhere, on an oil rig or in a big turbine, no one can tell me what that data set is worth. The owners, the curators, the consumers, no one can tell me in a quantified value manner what that's worth. So I think something that's really interesting for moving a truly digital economy forward and a data-centric economy is the concept of price transparency for data. I think it's something that's really interesting to try and pursue, and it's something I'm pursuing myself.
I'll challenge in that one on, if you're a believer in singularity, isn't data the ultimate commodity that's worth dirt when it's universally understood by a system that can digest and critically think through it instantly? So at the end of the day, doesn't data become the ultimate commodity that perhaps is valued much less than we perceive it today?
The presumption is there's equal access to data if it's a commodity. And my assumption is no. In capitalism, scarcity is what adds value. And people will be hoarding data. And people will need to know what it's worth and to be able to actually monetize it.
Vivek, should I just ask all the questions that are coming through this, or should I open it up for the crowd to ask? Okay. Well, if anybody has a burner and you're not getting a question in through the digitally, you can raise your hand and let me know. But otherwise, this is actually a fascinating thread to go off of. We have some other questions have come in around data center hardware and why it's not being designed for robotic replacement. OCP with QSFP cabling, etc. Does anybody want to comment on that?
So I remember that it probably happened a few years ago. I can't pin it down, but the majority purchasers of data center equipment in terms of servers, network storage, and so forth flipped over from the Global 2000 enterprise data centers to the very highly concentrated hyperscale cloud providers. And they have a fundamentally, you listen to James Hamilton just once, you'll realize they have a fundamentally different way of architecting and operating data centers than any enterprise ever has. So they will be the ones that already in the present day and certainly in the future are redefining, what comprises a data center. And clearly the automation they need to strive to for their business models is making it, less and less human-centric. The Prineville, Oregon data centers, I think, have, a handful of employees, and they're highly automated in every other way, and batching of anything physical is done as opposed to replacing it on demand. So I think, you're definitely going to see the majority of the market power, in terms of purchasers, get to less and less human-centric operations of data centers.
Yes, Scott.
Yeah, data centers have a funny little secret. If you're dealing with a security team, innovation moves at the pace of weekly. If you deal with the software team, they're pushing code every, maybe even a couple times a week or every 2 weeks. When you're dealing with hardware, you're dealing with a 3-year innovation cycle that kind of goes with life cycle of hardware. When you're dealing, and you dive further into the physical plant, you're dealing with change that doesn't occur over a 10 to 20-year period. So there's certain aspects of the data center as you get further and further towards the physical side of things that actually are not technology-based and tend to move really slow. So it's just a matter of time until that happens. But a little secret a lot of data center people know is the further you get physical in the data center, the further evolution occurs because that evolution presents risk presents downtime. It's just a different culture as you get more physical. Okay. So just slower.
Yep.
Just a quick take. I mean, a lot of the times in the hype of the web tier companies here in the Bay Area, we lose sight of the fact that Silicon Valley has the word silicon in it, and we're seeing an increasing wave of hardware startups starting to come back. And the reason for that is I think people have hit a wall with how much software can accomplish. In a world of distributed computing and parallel computing, I think the throughput rates have gone down. You don't get n throughput when you have n processors attached to each other. And the primary reason for that is you can have an NVIDIA GPU or an Intel x86. At the end of the day, the processor is only as fast as the data that it's processing. So I/O is a big bottleneck. And until the data is local to the processor and where the processor resides, sites, you're not going to have faster throughput times. So we're seeing a lot of innovation in architectures that solve this data locality problem. So I think Nutanix did part of it with hyperconvergence, but I think there's a new wave of hyperconvergence at the silicon layer that needs to happen.
I had a final question that came in that said, I'm still trying to understand what we're trying to manage at Hyperscale using AI. And so maybe as we come to the end, I wonder if you guys can share any anecdotes about how you're actually seeing AI used today in the data center, just to show like the real value that AI is actually currently delivering in the data center, or if there are any anecdotes that you want to share.
Closest thing I can come to is in the monitoring space. Because again, it's a very, very data-rich environment, and it's easy to do some sort of trend recognition and identify signatures and so forth. So I am seeing a lot of the log vendors and the application performance monitoring vendors extend their current offerings with AI-driven insights, because again, they have a fire hose of data at their disposal, and they're able to apply some fairly common knowledge models, be they neural nets or otherwise, and extract some unique insights and value out of that. So that's the first space I'm seeing in a data center context.
Terrific. Others? Yeah.
Yeah, so relative to by some of the things that we've been working on, to go back to the problem that I described in Chengdu in China, we are definitely seeing use cases where I'll pick one of those silos that I named, an electrical infrastructure expert that's in the US can create a persona of themselves and can give themselves, as many eyes as they need, as many ears as they need, and as many fingertips as they need, and as many minds as they need, and in as many locations as they need around the world. So thus kind of magnifying their on-presence capability, both from a mental and a physical perspective of what they're doing.
This is for a data center manager? Or
yeah, so we have rotary power UPS system problems that are being detected by sensors that have been empowered into senses based on somebody's expertise in the US on another part of the world.
And the reason why that's needed is because the other question was around this whole hyperscale thing. The hyperscaling is the amount of data, the amount of data centers that are being deployed, and all of that you need to have some way to have a modular platform where you can extend out that individual.
Yeah, it goes back to the exponential growth challenge, and this is really what AI gives, is if you are exponentially growing your technology stack, how much do we learn every year? So you need to be able to combine all of that together, and that's what AI really, really brings, is if your software and your technology is growing exponentially, it's pretty good to get 10% smarter in a year. So as you bring all that intelligence of a team together, it's about how AI can magnify me to keep up with that technology change.
That's great. Are there any other burning comments on that thread? Otherwise, yeah.
No, I just want to put one thought out there for anybody who's thinking of starting an AI company. There's this one problem that I've been thinking of, and I've been speaking to some people within the enterprise space, which is this whole idea of doing AI at the edge. I think AI in the cloud, it makes sense. There are tools out there that can help you do that. But think about putting AI at the edge. Can you have enough smarts out closer to the edge devices so you can avoid making the round trip to the cloud for any analytics? So as that stack and ecosystem evolves, are there unique problems that you can go solve?
Yep. Okay, I'm going to bring it to a close. And what I would like is for each of the panelists to get final words. And the way that I'd like to do this is each of the panelists gets to give a 6-word takeaway. So in 6 words or less, to share a final takeaway with the crowd. And after we get that takeaway, we'll thank that panelist for their participation. This came from Ernest Hemingway, who was once tasked with writing a 6-word novel. And he ended up accomplishing the task. It was a very sad 6 words. It was baby shoes, for sale, never used. Sort of a sad little 6-word novel. But in the spirit of a 6-word takeaway, what I'd love to do is start with Scott. Are you ready to go? We'll start with Scott, and then we'll work our way down to Abhi, and then thank each of the panelists after they get us.
Comment on the theme. Machines more machines, humans more human.
Machines more machines, humans more humans. Val.
So before I utter my brilliant 6 words, I just want to thank Twitter for permitting bad grammar to happen. Mine is going to be software eats world, and data feeds software.
That's great. Thank you.
So I don't have 4 words. Self-driving cars, we're going to have self-driving data center.
Wow, I feel like a sucker. This VC is open for business.
That's a good way to end it. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank the panelists, and thank you, the VLab team. I'll turn it over to Vivek.